Good afternoon and welcome to the Will Cain Show. The big, beautiful bill. Man, it's generating a lot of controversy, a lot of debate, a lot of heat, but I think it's also generating a lot of confusion and therefore not a lot of light. Right now at the White House, the Senate Finance Committee is meeting behind closed doors with President Trump on the mega bill. We're going to be watching that to see if those senators have anything to say after that meeting wraps. But in the meantime, what's in the bill? What's not in the bill? Does it increase deficit spending? Does it decrease our deficit? Who's backing down? Who is not? Why is there so much heat? Let's start with that heat and the loudest voices in the room. Elon Musk has gone absolutely scorched earth on the big, beautiful bill. He wrote on X, call your senator, call your congressman. Bankrupting America is not okay. Kill the bill. Now, this, as Elon's continuous opposition, is throwing House Speaker Mike Johnson for a loop.
Elon and I left on a great note. We were texting one another, happy texts, Monday. And then yesterday, 24 hours later, he does a 180 and he comes out and opposes the bill. And it surprised me, frankly. And I don't take it personal. We don't take it personal. Policy differences are not personal. I think he's flat wrong. I think he's way off on this, and I've told him as much, and I've said it publicly and privately.
I don't know about you, but I've been doing this for quite some time, and I still think the budgeting process is arcane. So it comes as no surprise that people within the Republican caucus or people within conservative circles have differing opinions on the effects of the big, beautiful bill. Let's together dive in and see if we can get some understanding. Here are the components. There are $1.5 trillion in federal spending cuts. The 2017 tax cuts extended permanently. Also eliminates tax on tips and overtime. Importantly, there's border security funding and stricter eligibility requirements for Medicaid. Several other elements as well there in the bill, including stripping states of the right to make laws or regulate AI for something like 10 years, something that has drawn now the ire of Marjorie Taylor Greene in the House. But see, the White House is still touting its main provisions, and they summarize it as follows. Here's Stephen Miller. He wrote, 1, it's the most significant border security and deportation effort in history, including the entire wall up front, now with no possibility of Democrat obstruction. 2, extension, full extension and expansion of the Trump tax cuts. This is what the CBO is scoring, not spending. Tax cuts, the ones we campaigned on. And 3, the largest welfare reform in history, cutting almost $2 trillion in spending. So those are the 3 major selling points, but still some Republicans are not on board with the big, beautiful bill. And why is that? Well, let's take a walk to the wall to see if we can narrow in on the 3 big sticking points among Republicans on the big, beautiful bill. So first of all, much has been touted about cutting back on Joe Biden's Green New scam. Now, this is green energy tax incentives that have been rolled back. These include zero-emission projects that do not begin construction within 60 days and clean energy vehicle tax credits. This has, surprisingly to some, made people wonder why are Republican senators opposed to the big, beautiful bill. Well, you can take a look. Senators like John Curtis of Utah or Tom Tillis of North Carolina have concerns. And you have to say, what is it about their constituency, at their states, they want to hang on to some of these green energy tax credits? But it's not just green energy. There are cuts to Medicaid. As you heard Stephen Miller respond, Medicaid is one of the biggest reforms in this bill is to entitlement programs in Medicaid in quite some time. There's an estimated $600 to $880 billion in cuts over a decade to Medicaid. How do they do that? You've heard Republicans talk a lot about work requirements, eligibility requirements. Well, more frequent eligibility requirements requiring re-verification every 6 months. But some, like Senator Susan Collins of Maine, and we've heard similar sounds from Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, are worried. They're trying to figure out what the provider tax reforms are, but she's worried about the effect on rural hospitals in Maine. All right, and then finally, there's how much of a deficit savings actually is there in this bill? Well, according to the CBO, the big, beautiful bill adds $2.4 trillion over the next 10 years. It's $3.7 trillion in tax cuts, and then you take out the spending cuts. Now, this is what Stephen Miller and Mike Johnson are saying is not accurate. They don't like the CBO's accounting, and they don't like tax cuts, which we live under and with right now, counted as contributing to the deficit. This is Mike Johnson.
They use a different scoring. I think their assumptions are wrong. We've long complained about it. CBO has done some fair work in some areas, but their projection of growth is always off. It's a constant complaint around here, and, you know, it needs to be addressed in some way. We're looking at that.
You heard him say their projection of growth is always off. The Trump administration and Mike Johnson pointing out they're counting on economic growth due to tax cuts to reduce the deficit. But even with that, Kentucky's Rand Paul told me yesterday he sees the bill as too big to succeed.
To put things in perspective, the bill increases spending for the military and for border over $300 billion. The Doge cuts, which aren't in this bill, were about $200 billion. So this bill actually increases in the first couple of years spending more than all the Doge cuts combined. My objection to the bill is they're going to raise the debt ceiling more than they ever have, $5 trillion, and that this will be the largest increase in the debt ceiling ever. And if the Republicans all vote for it, the Republicans will own the debt.
So you heard Senator Paul say he has no problem with the growth projections in the bill. He has a problem with raising the debt ceiling. Let's put that then to a senator who is backing the bill. It is Oklahoma Republican Markwayne Mullin. Senator, thanks for being with us. I think I want to start with the debt ceiling, if we might, together. You heard Senator Paul say that's his big problem, raising the debt ceiling. He points out, and others have pointed out, if the deficit savings, if the deficit reduction is real, why do you need to raise the debt ceiling?
Well, it's kind of like buying a failing business, right? My wife and I used to buy companies all the time, and sometimes we'd have to borrow money to purchase a failing company, but we knew the projection. We knew that we could get it into the black while it was in the red, but we had to go over a hump. We inherited a crap show from the Biden administration. They had literally doubled almost every agency's budget in the last 4 years. We're in debt. We can't just simply stop spending that debt and expect that we're going to pay it off all at the same time. We have to borrow the money to get us over the hump to let Biden's policies fade out and Trump's policies increase. We know for sure that when we make tax cuts permanent, when we did this in 2017, CBO said we was going to have a $1.5 trillion deficit, and actually what happened is the economy increased by $1.7 trillion is what we ended up bringing into the Treasury. So we have to borrow to get us past this point. Immediately, those two lines will start closing as we start seeing Trump's policies continue to go into effect. We see the economy come roaring back. We see the manufacturing come back. Right. We see jobs increase. We see wages come home increase. We will start seeing the spending go down because, by the way, this is just the first cut at deficit spending, which we're cutting $1.5 trillion in deficit spending. We're eventually going to cross those lines. Now, where does that line cross? The reason why we're doing $4.5 trillion, almost $5 trillion in the debt increase is because those lines will cross about the same time that runs out if everything continues to work. Now, but Will, let me make a very important point here real quick. If we don't do it, because we're going to have to do it, we're not going to default, right? We're not going to default on our payments. We have to pay our debt. We borrowed it, we spent it, we got to pay it. So if we don't do it in the reconciliation, our next choice, with reconciliation, we only have to have 51, meaning we don't have to negotiate with anybody but ourselves. If we do it again later, which we're going to have to do it this summer, then if we don't do it through reconciliation, it'll be a 60-vote threshold, and we'll have to give away the keys to the White House.
And we're going to talk about that together. They're already telling me how little time I have with you. I don't care. I want to get this together because this is important. Okay?
I'm with you.
I want to stay on the debt ceiling for just one more moment. So you understand this. There are people watching right now. There are Republicans that are concerned that Congress, Republican or Democrat, constantly promises spending reductions, and it really has only ever gone north, Senator, and you know that. Deficits and debt have racked up over decades and years. So do you agree with President Trump then? He just put this out about the debt ceiling. I think we can pull that up. He said that he wants to do away with the debt ceiling. He said, I'm very pleased to announce that after all these years, I agree with Senator Elizabeth Warren on something. The debt limit should be entirely scrapped to prevent economic catastrophe. It's too devastating to be put in the hands of political people that may want to use it despite the horrendous effect it could have on our country and indirectly on the world. So he doesn't want to, Senator, incrementally raise the debt ceiling. He wants to do away with it as something that controls government spending.
Well, here's what I would say. Elizabeth wants to do away with it because she doesn't believe in you can't spend enough, right? You're going to spend like a drunken sailor. What the president is referring to here, I believe, is like it should be tied to the budget. If the budget is passed and we're spending X amount of dollars, then we should automatically assume that's going to be part of the debt. And so if we're going to pass a budget and we're going to pass appropriation bills, then those two should be tied on together. And he's not wrong on that, because what happens every time we run up to a debt limit increase, it becomes a negotiating political tool, and everything in the kitchen sink gets thrown in it. And it's not simply just raising, and it's not simply just raising the debt limit. You get all types of pet projects that ends up increasing the debt again. So I understand what he's trying to say there.
Last thing, and this is what you talked about, okay, the 60 versus 50 vote threshold. Okay, I would love for you to help me and the audience understand with some light here. You can't institute discretionary spending cuts through the reconciliation package, the one big, beautiful bill. You have to focus on mandatory spending, correct? So anything that Doge has offered up, this isn't the vehicle for that. But instead, what you guys are suggesting is that will be done through rescission, that you will go back to Congress. You've already had one $9 billion suggestion to bring more Doge cuts in. But that's not satisfying Elon. Why do you think he is dissatisfied, and many others, with the level of spending cuts you brought in through reconciliation?
Well, everybody wants more, but even through reconciliation, it's a very thin window because it is mandatory spending, but you can't touch Social Security. So the biggest thing in mandatory spending is Social Security. We can't even get into Social Security to do the waste and fraud. That has to go through, honestly, the appropriation and the discretionary spending to get into it. So reconciliation has a very narrow window. We can only do a mandatory spending and just deal with Medicaid. We also can only deal with taxes. Very small window. When we start dealing with rescission has to be very specific. That deals with, once again, discretionary or spending, and it has to be sent to Congress. Congress has to vote because it's a special privilege. It only takes 51 votes at the same time. But Congress can't enact the rescission. The White House has to send it to us, and we have 40 days to handle it.
Okay, I'm way over time, but I have to ask you this last thing. Then if a viewer is watching, or anyone is watching, they're like, well, when do all the Doge cuts be made? How can they be made permanent? If it can't be done through reconciliation, and it has to be so targeted and narrow, and then as a byproduct, small in reconciliation, how can we see the Doge cuts actually implemented?
Two ways. Rescission package, which the president can send, and then as soon as we finish reconciliation, we move right into appropriations. As we're working with these agencies, remember the Doge department has basically dispersed out, and they're part of every agency now. They're actually working with the agencies. So as these secretaries and these directors that the president has appointed, which are very well qualified, they come to us with a budget and they say, we recognize X, Y, and Z that needs to be out of our budget. Please withhold that with our appropriations. That's where you're going to start seeing it in every single meeting we've had right now in the appropriations process, because I'm an appropriator. We have seen it by the secretaries bringing that information to us.
Okay, so that means the secretaries are listening to Doge, and they will be making the appropriate recommendations to Congress for those numbers coming from Doge. We hope that's true. It defies the history of government, but we do hope that it's true. All right, Senator Mullin, I think that provided some light, and we appreciate it.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.